Welcome to the Sports Spectrum Podcast, where faith and sports collide. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This is episode number 29 of the Sports Spectrum Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us here on today's program. My name is Jason Romano. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are found. We do appreciate you tuning in, downloading the podcast, subscribing to the podcast, and being a part of all that we're doing with this show. Also, sportsspectrum.com. That's the place to go to find our podcast there, all archived, as well as show notes, some quotes, our favorite quotes from each podcast, as well as some information about every guest and a place to find them, whether it's on the web or connecting with them on social media. So check that out. All of the good stuff we got going on here at Sports Spectrum can be found at sportsspectrum.com. All right, today's guest, Chad Hennings, three-time Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, full disclosure, and I do mention this in the beginning of the interview, but I am a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan. I've been since 1979 or so, almost 38 years, so I've been a fan for a very long time. And those 90s Dallas Cowboys teams are some of the great teams in the history of the NFL. And Chad Hennings was a part of that on that defense, starting on the defensive line. And it's really kind of a great story to hear from Chad because he goes to the Air Force and he serves at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He dominates in college. He's an All-American and an Outland Trophy winner in 1987. And then he serves 4 years in the Air Force before his NFL career. So he really comes in as an older player at 26 years old. As a rookie in 1992 when he wins a Super Bowl. So Chad had this sort of skewed look, if you will, at success in the NFL because 3 out of his first 4 seasons as a professional, he's in the Super Bowl. In all 4 seasons, he's in the NFC Championship game. So Chad saw it all as a Dallas Cowboy, and we're excited to have him here on the Sports Spectrum Podcast. So let's get right to it. Here is our conversation with 3-time Super Bowl champion from the Dallas Cowboys, Chad Hennings. Chad, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason, it's great to be on with you.
It's great to have you here. And as I mentioned before the interview, full disclosure here, I've been a Dallas Cowboys fan since, 1979 or so, late 70s, early 80s. So this is a treat for me to talk Cowboys football with you. But you have so much going on, and your story is really an amazing story that I think all of our listeners, not just Cowboy fans, are really going to be in for a treat here. But of course, we have to start, and we're going to talk about your journey in a minute, but we have to start with Dallas. And I think the best way to do it is this current team that comes off having the best record in the NFC, and Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott have 2 of the greatest rookie seasons we've seen, maybe ever. What are your thoughts on this current Cowboys team for 2017?
Always optimistic going into to training camp. I think they have offensively the tools to, first of all, we'll hope that there won't be that sophomore slump with the 2 rookies that you had just mentioned, or now second-year guys. But the things to address, as always, if they want to take it to the next level, it's defense, pass rushers. Address some of the needs that were in their secondary that due to the loss of free agency, some of the players from last year. But they've got great connectivity. Being around some of the young guys there in the locker room, they have great culture. Coach Jason Garrett has done a great job of that, of talking about bringing in the tradition with implementing it. That there's being a Cowboys, it's not a right, it's a privilege. And putting in the work ethic that during this off season, I'm optimistic. But it's still the big question for me is defense and pass rush.
Well, they addressed that at least on paper in the draft, which is good. And they drafted defensive ends and pass rushers in the secondary with 2 or 3 of the picks that they had. So they're definitely recognizing the need to fill some gaps in that defense for sure. Now, you were on the last Cowboys team, it seems so long ago, that won a Super Bowl 30 back in January of 96. You had 2 sacks in that game, actually. And so it makes me just think, and that's 21 years ago. How far away is this Cowboys team from ending that Super Bowl drought?
Again, defense, they get that answered, and I think that they're there. Offensively, they have the best, if not one of the top offenses in the NFL. But again, the thing that separated us, our teams from 20 plus years ago now to this team is we were so deep in the defensive line. We had pass rushers. We had, a Hall of Fame pass rusher with Charles Haley, as well as, the guys in the Deion Sanders in the backfield too, as a Hall of Fame defensive back. That was the big difference, I think, and that's where we have, this current team. Once they answer those questions, again, I hate to be a broken record, but it's defense, defense, defense.
Well, you're a defensive guy, so that makes complete sense. And do you find yourself
Yeah.
saying we a lot still, even though you haven't played in, 16, 17 years?
It's once a Cowboy, always a Cowboy. It really is. And Jerry Jones has done a great job of reaching out to some of us, former alumni, to bring them in, to make them, to make all of us still continue to feel a part of the team. He has a Legends Committee, which basically we're ambassadors for the team. We do different things in the community, from charity tournaments, golf tournaments, to speak to different corporate sponsors, to outreach, whatever it might be, and it allows us to feel a part of the team. And it's good that that we get together and we still reminisce. We just had our 25th anniversary of that '92 Super Bowl 27, and to be able to see all the guys and bring everybody back together, it's a special time, because for Cowboy fans out there, that was the glory years, and we keep talking about back then. I want to start talking about the current team and quit talking about what we did back in the '90s. This team needs to win the big one.
Absolutely. We're talking to Chad Hennings, 3-time Super Bowl champion, here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. And Chad, let's go back to your journey and where it started in Iowa. You began your football career on offense, I read, as an all-state tight end in high school. Tell us about the early days of playing football.
Well, the early days, you go back, as we all did, a lot of kids, everybody wanted to, back in my time period, wanted to, be a soldier. We all played Army or we played football. On playground in the recess, we went out and we learned how to tackle without utilizing helmets. And, and I think that's one of the reasons why today that kids just don't know how to tackle, but that's a subject for another time. But, I grew up playing football, started officially in junior high school, played in Iowa. I was actually an all-state, not only a tight end, but I was actually an all-state punter. And, I played on a defensive end position, but went to the Air Force Academy, played a little bit my freshman year as a tight end, and then I moved on the other side of the ball, spring ball of my freshman year, to the defensive side. And just, I guess the rest is history, progressed and really blossomed in that defensive scheme that we had, and eventually, win the Outland Trophy, All-American status, and drafted by the Cowboys, but, fulfilling my Air Force commitment first and foremost.
So what was the thinking, and why choose, or the decision, I guess, to go into the United States Air Force Academy to play football?
For me, growing up in a small rural community in Iowa, wasn't highly recruited. Was recruited by local schools, University of Iowa, Iowa State, to play football. I wasn't recruited that highly until I won the state championship in wrestling as a heavyweight my senior year. That's when a lot of the schools started to show interest. But by that time, I was committed to the Air Force because, it would be a dream to play in the NFL, but I was thinking more along the lines of experience. I wanted an experience unlike a lot of my peers that were going into playing in Division I, Division II football. I wanted something beyond just the standard academic experience, beyond the standard secondary educational experience that you get in college. So the movie then was Top Gun, was a big film that was out. There was another one called Lords of Discipline about military academies, service academies, or military schools. And I wanted that something different, that I wanted that thing to, quote unquote, see if I had the right stuff. I wanted to challenge in all aspects. And you can't argue with going to school in the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies and outside Colorado Springs. It was a beautiful location, but my first couple of years you didn't get to see too much of the mountains because you're running around doing all the military stuff. But I just wanted that experience beyond what I could have got if I'd have stayed in state, went to the University of Iowa or Iowa State.
So what is that experience like? You describe it as the military stuff. Like explain to us listening who did not go into the military, but who are playing football and you're in college per se, taking classes, but explain sort of how that structure worked for you.
Well, their whole aspect is training individuals to mind, body, and spirit holistically to be officers in the United States Air Force. That's the mission of a service academy. That's the mission of the Air Force Academy. So after graduating from high school, a lot of my peers were, taking the next 2.5 months off of before they would start college, either in August or September. We had to report at the end of June, first part of July for going through military training for our basic cadet training, and spent the next 6 weeks learning all the basics, how to march, just like a standard military basic training that anybody would go to that would enlist in any particular military branch of military service. So training on the range, how to shoot weapons, how to march, how to salute, a lot of memorization on Air Force, either quotes from former politicians, statesmen, military leaders, how to make your bed appropriately, how to shine your shoes, all the little ancillary things that go with military service. And I think the one big key thing that we learned is if you can't do the little things right, the big things, you're not going to be able to achieve or accomplish those. So it's attention to detail and then all the character training. So after that 6-week period, that's when school starts. So that's where your academics and typically, I think I averaged almost 20 credit hours per semester going through a service academy, plus getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, marching to breakfast, attending classes throughout the day, break time for lunch where we would have military training post that, finish classes like at 2:30, go down to football practice till 5:30, come back, eat your dinner in the chow hall, come back to your room. We would have academic call to quarters from 8 o'clock. Taps would be at 10 o'clock, and then, rinse and repeat. And that's where it was 24/7, 365 days a year. So it was very intense. But the cool thing about it, too, is in the summers when a lot of my peers that went to other schools would go home on vacation, get a summer job, do whatever, we were still doing military training where we would get a chance to go through survival, escape, resistance, evasion training, simulating if you were a shot down pilot behind enemy lines. You would go to different Air Force bases to train or to see what a quote unquote the real Air Force was like. We get a chance to fly gliders. If you were below the weight limit, you could free fall parachute. We also had a program there where you get a chance to fly motorized aircraft, Cessna 172s, to give you a flair for what it would be like to go through pilot training. So everything that we did there was geared again with that mission, sole mission and purpose was to train individuals to become officers in the United States Air Force.
We're talking to Chad Hennings here, 3-time Super Bowl champion from the Dallas Cowboys and also the Outland Trophy winner in 1987, Chad. And you mentioned that earlier, being an All-American Outland Trophy winner. So, and probably what's happening here as you're getting ready to finish your football career in college, that you're not going to be necessarily able to play football professionally for a while. So what is the mindset for you when you finish your career and then in the 1988 season, you're drafted by the Cowboys, but you're drafted in a round that doesn't even exist. It's the 11th round, the 290th overall pick. That doesn't even exist anymore. What was the thought process at that time for you, knowing that you weren't going to be able to play for a few years?
Having had the season that I had, it was my mindset going through that season was, just the next game, preparation for the next game to win and to be the best D lineman that I could. And when I was in New York, downtown Sheridan Hotel for the Outland Trophy presentation, Michael Dean Perry, Daniel Stubbs, and myself were the 3 finalists, and then they called my name. that's when I thought, oh my goodness, I potentially had what it took to play at the next level, because I never contemplated that, because it was, it's never an option for me, because I knew I had a military commitment. But at that point in time, I began to think, you know what, I could play at the next level. And that's where, for me, I'll just, in total transparency, say the inner turmoil began to stir in my inner being, because here, cerebrally, I knew I had a military commitment. And I knew that to have the identity, to be the individual, the man of virtue and character that I chose to be, that I needed to fulfill my military commitment. But in my heart, I wanted to play football. I wanted to play, see if I, quote unquote, again, had the right stuff to play at the next level in the NFL. But I knew, I gave my word that having graduated from the Air Force Academy, you have a 5-year military commitment. But at that point in time, I chose to up it to 8 years, because I wanted to fly jets. And so technically playing in the NFL was never an option. Well, when I was, my pilot training assignment, where I was learning to fly jets, was in Wichita Falls, Texas, just an hour and a half outside the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area at Shepherd Air Force Base. So I would, having been drafted by the Cowboys, they would give me 50-yard line sideline passes, 50-yard line seats, and I'd take a few of my buddies with me, and we'd go down in the fall, down to the Cowboy games. And again, I'm seeing the guys I was drafted with, Michael Irvin, Ken Norton Jr., all these guys competing out there. And I thought, it really stirred up, and I would receive phone calls while I was in our admin room, getting ready to hop out and to, fly a jet, fly a mission, when I'm trying to concentrate on what it takes to be a pilot. I'd get a phone call from somebody from the Dallas media wanting to conduct an interview with me, and so you can, just by these stories, understand that I had a lot of stuff happening at that point in time, and that's where I think I learned the primary reason, or one of the primary aids that helped me become the individual in my progression of who I chose to be, again, as an individual of character. That, to be a man of your word, that you have to focus on the task at hand even more so, and not think about the what ifs. And the what ifs was playing in the NFL. And I think for me, it was extremely difficult period of time, emotionally, mentally, going through that. But it really, God had a bigger plan for me, and it was as such that I needed to walk through that to learn who I was, to identify with that, to own that aspect of my character before I would have the opportunities that ultimately I had later in life.
You mentioned that you wanted to fly jets. Describe what that time was like from 88 to 92 and the types of things you were doing as part of your military commitment.
The initial jet trainer that we flew were the T-37 and the T-38. They retired the 37. So again, I'm 11th round draft pick. They don't have jet initially flew in the Air Force. They don't have. That's right. So there's my age again. But the thing that was another challenge for me, from a physical standpoint, I didn't mention earlier was, I'm a big guy. I had to receive waivers for my height and weight to initially be able to fly, because I was too tall and too heavy for the ejection seat, because they never knew if I'd clear the tail if I ever had to punch out of the aircraft. So I always had that in the back of my mind. Don't do anything stupid that's going to put you in a position where you have to bail out. But 13 months I spent at Wichita Falls learning to fly jets, the initial jet trainer and the primary jet trainer, learning how to fly low levels, how to fly by instruments, how to fly in formation. All the primary things that gave me a great foundation. And another great thing, the program I went through was called NJEP. It was the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program, where we got the opportunity to train with a lot of our NATO allies. So I trained with Germans, with Dutch, with Danes, those people from Belgium, from the Netherlands, Turkey, Greece, our Italians. So it was a lot of fun getting to know our NATO allies and to train with people from different cultures, and they get the experience of what it's like to be here in the United States, particularly in the Texas area. And again, that was a great precursor because my first duty assignment was ultimately in England. I received the assignment to fly the A-10 Warthog, the tank buster. So after I graduated from pilot training, I went through lead-in fighter training. It was called LIFT, where it was at Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo, New Mexico, where you learn how to be a fighter pilot, doing the dogfighting, which they called BFM, basic fighter maneuvering. And it just reinforced how to go to a range and get the elementary aspects of how to deliver a weapon, free fall ordnance. From there, I went to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona, to learn how to fly the A-10, my primary weapon system that I was going to fly on active duty. And that was about a 6-month program to learn how to employ. And my first mission in the A-10 was solo, because it's a single-seat fighter, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. You think about anybody that you're a young kid, 16 years old, going to drive the car. You ever drove it, and Dad throws you the keys and say, hey, go have fun. It's not quite the same analogy, but
right.
You think about it. First mission is straight out of the box. But it was a phenomenal aircraft, and my duty assignment then was to be stationed at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, which were the twin bases in the UK, in England. And the base was about 90 miles northeast of London in East Anglia. And our missions were, at that time during the Cold War, or the latter part of the Cold War, and it was to forward deploy to Germany on German bases to provide a presence in case, the way it was originally stated, if the Soviets or the East Germans would cross the Fulda Gap from East Germany to West Germany, we were there to slow that progress down, because their tanks, all their armor would come flying across the border, and we were the speed bump to try and slow them down. And statistic, what I always quote when I give speeches too, that there was a study shown that the life expectancy of an A-10 pilot in that scenario is about 15 minutes, because that's how hot that forward edge of the battle area is going to be. So if war were to ever have kicked off, they're kiss your wife goodbye, because it's likelihood of you coming back, having to punch out would have been bad. But during that 2-year period that I was in England, the Gulf War kicks off. In 1991, we deployed our from Central Command, all of the fighter squadrons from the U.S. went over, sat in the box, the desert, in Saudi Arabia, and finally we went in and to liberate Kuwait in Desert Storm. I was assigned to a different Air Force command, which was USAFE, United States Air Forces in Europe, and we finally got tasked to fly. We were the first squadron of A-10s to fly out of England to Incirlik, Turkey, to support and to protect the Kurdish people, where Saddam Hussein the year prior to that had dropped chemical weapons, mustard gas, and had killed quite a few of the Kurds. So we were there to protect them in the northern portion of Iraq. So I flew at that time, spent 6 months there flying missions across the southern Turkish, northern Syria border into northern Iraq, right where ISIS and all this stuff is going on now, 26 years later, and enjoyed my time doing that. And then our armed forces, after the Gulf War wound down in 92, went through a reduction in force. And I mean, that's a whole different story there if you want me to get into that maybe later, but allowed me then to get a waiver. They waived my pilot training commitment, not just for me, but across the board for all military guys, commitment, because they wanted to downsize out of the Air Force. And then they even waived 2 years off our service academy commitment, which then allowed me to kind of raise my hand, volunteer to then go play for the Dallas Cowboys.
Incredible. So you get to the Cowboys, and we're talking to Chad Hennings here, the 3-time Super Bowl champion with Dallas. And you get to the Cowboys, and you walk into a gold mine of talent and a team about to take the 1990s by storm. And 92 is when you get there, and you mentioned earlier that it is the 25th anniversary of that team and the Super Bowl that you guys won. But you must have been walking in there thinking, man, is this how it's going to be every year? You win 2 Super Bowls in your first 2 seasons. What was that time like, just arriving in Dallas and walking into what was a collection of talent that might have been the best in the NFL?
For me, a great analogy was it's like hopping in a jet and kicking it in afterburner and never pulling it out of afterburner. It was fast and furious. And, the great thing about that team, offense, defense, special teams, I can honestly say there was zero animosity on the team. The guys competed against one another, but it was a total focus on not just winning football games, not just winning your division or winning the conference, but it was about winning Super Bowls. That's what it was about. And we were so young at the time that I've never been around a group of guys that worked harder. I've never been around a group of guys that were more focused on, that primary mission. For me, it was a lot like being in a fighter squadron, that, your mission was to go out and to, take out whatever it was that we had to take out, and total focus on that. And guys prepped, prepared. It was the same in the NFL. And, after we won that third Super Bowl in 4 years, we literally thought, this is how it's supposed to be. But then, that's when the wheels kind of started to fall off the bus, when it was kind of from destruction from within, that turmoil from the coaching standpoint, with Jimmy Johnson leaving or being fired, however you want to view it. Barry Switzer, different kind of coaching regime, coaching style coming in, players starting to not have a common focus of that, where individual agendas kind of came into play, a lot of guys coming up for contracts, free agency, and that common focus, that common theme, then went away to individual agendas. And that's where the fabric, even though we still had that foundational talent, it was very difficult to continue to repeat from thereafter. But it was a heck of a ride, and it was a lot of fun. And those teams, those defenses, we were number one defense in the NFL a couple times, and most certainly a top 5 defense, for those 4 or 5 year run. That, that's what kept us in games, and that's where we went in and a lot of times completely dominated teams.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because you win 5 straight division titles, 4 straight NFC championship games you play in, you win 3 Super Bowls, the 3 that you played in. And obviously the triplets and Michael and Emmett and Troy, those guys are getting all the accolades. And then Dion comes along and he's getting all the praise. And you're kind of the dirty work guy in the trenches, just doing your thing. And you probably liked it that way, I would imagine, right?
That's growing up on a farm in Iowa. I always had that blue collar work ethic. And that's where I realized for myself that I had to work harder. I had to prove a point that, for me to even get on the field, my rookie year when I came in, we were 3 deep at different positions. And I knew for me that I had to work harder than everybody else. I had to, I volunteered to play special teams my rookie year just to get on the field. I was running down kickoffs. I was on the punt team,
right?
Just to get time on the field, to show that. And another great lesson that I learned in life is, the more you can do, the more difficult it is for them to get rid of you, to volunteer for things, and to just, for me, it was a great character builder, because I got over any ego that I would have had. That, you can imagine leaving at the collegiate level, where you're a unanimous All-American Outland Trophy winner, you're supposed to be the best of the best, to come in and now you're fighting just for a position. And I've never really played special teams. I never played any special teams in college. Now I'm volunteering to play special teams. That you get over yourself pretty quick if you want to have any type of time spent in the NFL or have a career. And that's where I kind of garnered the reputation. I'll do whatever it takes, and I'm going to work hard and keep my head down and be the best teammate that I could. And for me, and that's what I gather, more pride. And people ask a lot of times, what was your favorite moment? Was it a favorite play, favorite game? I always talk about, for me, it was always about the relationships with my teammates. But with that, how would you describe, the people have asked, how would you describe your career in the NFL? And I say, for me, the best compliment anybody could have been was that he was a great teammate. And for me, that's what it was all about.
Now, your NFL career came to an end at the age of 35 in the year 2000, also the same year that Troy Aikman's career, came to an end as well with the concussions. Michael Irvin retires before that. Emmett retires in 2004. I'm just curious from a fan perspective, I guess, more than a journalist perspective, but from a fan perspective, can you just describe the in overarching sort of general terms, what it's like to put that cowboy uniform on, that cowboy helmet on, and go out and strap them up and just battle every Sunday?
It's one of those iconic things that it was extremely surreal, because I can remember my first preseason game in Texas Stadium, walking out on the field, putting that helmet on. It was like, man, this is the same helmet. This is the same stadium that Bob Lilly played in. This is the same stadium that Roger Staubach, Walt Garrison, Drew Pearson, Larry Cole, all these guys, Bob Brunig, that I grew up watching on play. And it's like, I can consider myself in that same realm of individuals who have played for the Cowboys. Tom Landry, Gil Brandt. Just think of the history and the heritage of that organization, and then to be able to start and to play and to contribute, it's special, and that's where it's so key. And again, I'll reiterate, Jason Garrett has done a good job of bringing guys back, because tradition is important, heritage is important. That particularly for these young kids to realize that it's more than just going out collecting a paycheck and catching balls or making tackles. You represent something that it's a higher calling, something that is a greater calling, and to utilize that platform for the good, and not just to be all about you, self-interest, and collect, as I said, collect that paycheck. So, to put it back all together, it was extremely, it was an honor and it was a privilege to do that. And that's why I try to work so hard to represent that Cowboy star in a manner that was as appropriate and called for.
We're talking to Chad Hennings, 3-time Super Bowl champion of the Dallas Cowboys. What an incredible journey that he has had. And he ends up retiring after the year 2000. He gets a College Football Hall of Fame call in 2006, but it's even more than that with Chad. He's the author of 3 books and is speaker, and he's got some awesome things going on with ministry and business. And Chad, I was just looking in one of your books, Rules of Engagement, that you wrote, and you write about your faith journey. And this is a faith and sports podcast, so I want to talk about what that faith journey was like for you. And in the book, you called yourself a believer who, quote, punched the clock. So I'm just curious what that meant to you, and when did that faith in Jesus Christ start to take shape for you in your life?
Yeah, I grew up. Great question, and I love to share this aspect because it's so important for me. I think the greatest crisis that we have in our country today is an aspect of identity, whether that be for individuals of faith or individuals that are trying to figure out, particularly millennials, who they are. And for me, my identity was always about what I was doing, whether that was as an athlete, student athlete in college, or in high school, as a fighter pilot, or as a football player. That's where I gained my identity as to who I was. But what you do does not define who you are. And until early in my Cowboy career, my son Chase, who was 2.5 at the time, got really sick, and his whole journey with that, where we didn't know what was going to happen from one day to the next. And that was the very first thing where I could not control. I couldn't overcome. I couldn't fix it. And for men, that's a very vulnerable place to be. But through all that, I began to realize, and through that painful process of realizing who Jesus Christ was, who our Heavenly Father is, and the importance of the Holy Spirit in guiding day to day, as I was making plans, the Lord truly was directing my steps. And I began to own that aspect of who I was as an individual, not as Chad Hennings, former Dallas Cowboy or businessman or whatnot, that I was Chad Hennings, a son of a living God, and that my purpose was to worship Him, to make His name known. That's who I am called to be. And with that, then, no matter what I do, and I've done a lot of different things in life, I find my purpose, no matter what, is to glorify God, to make His name known, to bring His kingdom here on earth. And so I went from punching that clock of going through the motions as a Christian to truly having that relationship base with Jesus Christ, to realizing who I am, what I'm called to be, and to how now I minister to other men, encourage other men, and to how I relate to individuals that I do business with and audiences that I'm able to speak to, talking about the importance of identity and character and faith.
Now, we have a lot of men who listen to this podcast, and as a men's ministry leader myself, I've discovered the importance for the men to get together, to fellowship, to just do life in a very real and transparent way. You mentioned this as a leader of men, as a speaker to men, and now you're doing an awesome work with Wingmen Ministries. Tell us why you started that and what Wingmen Ministries is.
Wingman was, like a lot of things, was started out of a need. I realized, having gone through that issue with my son Chase, that I didn't have a lot of those close relationships where I could be transparent, to admit vulnerability, weakness, inability to overcome obstacles in life. So that's where I drew into this aspect of Wingman. And Wingman, the whole purpose of it is to encourage men to form transparent, Christ-centered, masculine relationships. And we do that twofold of getting together, of bringing speakers in. I call it casting the net, to do corporate events where we breakfast and guys just kind of gather, have a good time. But where the rubber meets the road for the ministry is on opposing weeks, we have guys break off into small groups where I give men the opportunity to lead small group ministry and give them the autonomy to do what they want, whether that's accountability groups, whether that's a Bible study, whether that's works in the community. But, for them, I keep it very basic and very simple. Two key aspects. It's got to be Christ-centered. Don't get off into the denominational theological weeds. Keep it between the ditches, and then you do a work in the community. An active faith, is a live faith. And when you give men that empowerment, when you give men the opportunity to, have skin in the game, that's where you see men bloom and prosper to be the men that God is calling them to be. And I utilize Wingman, the whole aspect of what a wingman is, because when I would fly a mission in combat or a training mission, you never went solo. You went with someone else. And whether that was a 2-ship or a 4-ship of planes to accomplish a mission. And that's the same thing. To go through life as a man, you need relationships, deep relationships, that you can be vulnerable. You can open up the kimono, to be transparent, to encourage one another, and to realize that, to go through life, we need to be a part of the body of Christ, to utilize your talents for his greater glory and greater good. And man, it's really taken off. I'm blessed to be a part of it, to hear the testimonies of how men's lives have been changed and impacted. And to me, that's, that resonates more with me than winning any Super Bowl or accomplishing anything that I have, because I truly realize that my legacy is not defined by accomplishment or achievements or money made. It's by the number of people that I've been able to impact in my life, and hopefully for the good.
That's awesome. How can people find out more about Wingman Ministries? What's the website?
Wingmen.org. So with an E, plural, wingmen.org. And we have a lot of resources up there, and we videotape all of our speakers, and we've had some pretty phenomenal guys, from former teammates of mine from the Cowboys to archaeologists to military, former Navy SEALs, fighter pilots to businessmen. So we have a broad breadth of content that's out there, and that's, we just give it all away. Allow the guys, anybody to utilize that, to be inspired, to be motivated, but most certainly to be the men that God is calling each and every one of us to be, if you profess a belief in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior.
Love it. Wingmen.org is the website, so check that out. And also, I mentioned earlier you're an author. You've written 3 books, and your latest is Forces of Character. Now, you've mentioned that word character quite a bit during our time together, and it's a collection of stories and interviews. Tell us sort of the concept of why you wrote this book.
I wrote the book. I was reading a book by a gentleman named Dallas Willard called The Divine Conspiracy several years ago, and he had a quote on one of the chapter headings that says, "You can't change character or behavior and leave your belief intact." And I thought, wow. Anybody can manipulate character or behavior, but as you change that, if I challenge somebody, what's your identity, who you are, who do you choose to be as a man, people realize, you mean I have a choice? And then when you start to realize that a concept of identity, it's going to draw you to that ultimate conclusion, or a question, I should say, of, who am I? Who am I called to be? Is there there's got to be something greater than just about me, that I fit into this thing called life. What is it all about? And that's where the faith-based component comes in. So I wanted to sit down, and I had conversations with 10 people that impacted my life. And as this, force of character, the subtitle is Conversations About Building a Life of Impact. So I interviewed many people that your listeners would recognize: Roger Staubach, Troy Aikman, Jason Garrett, San Antonio Spurs coach Greg Popovich, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. But I also interviewed a survivor of Auschwitz, a international human rights attorney out of former communist Romania, a space shuttle commander, an astronaut, the CEO for National Center on Fathering, to a homelessness expert out of Dallas. And it was their story about character, how, when they recognize that there's a right and there's a wrong, who were their mentors, who helped them along the way, and how they have incorporated this aspect of character in their lives. And, I wanted to show that it was, whether you're male, female, black, white, character is ubiquitous, and how we need it to be able to function in our society today. And I think the topic is, for me, it's extremely timely, because you see all this fractional polarization that we have in our culture today. And again, that's why I firmly believe that as a nation, collectively, we don't have that identity. And that's my purpose. And I guess one of my personal missions now is to be that Pied Piper of the aspect why character is important, and why identity is important, and who you are is important, who you choose to be is important. And because it's vital to our families, it's vital to our relationships, and for the United States, it's vital to our country.
That book, again, is called Forces of Character: Conversations About Building a Life of Impact. You can get that on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. Okay, a couple more minutes, Chad. I just want to play a little rapid fire with you if you're willing to do this. I'll give you a couple names from your era with the Cowboys, 92 to 2000. And you give me the first word or the first sentence that comes to your mind on each person. You ready?
Yep, fire away.
All right, let's do it. Emmitt Smith.
Emmitt, dedicated. What Emmitt was for me was an individual who early in his career didn't quite probably have the work ethic, but he realized soon in his career that he needed to do things above and beyond, and then transformed himself through that by tweaking little different things, the way he trained, et cetera, to be the greatest running back in the NFL, the yardage leader. And he's was a great teammate, very dedicated, very loyal, great family man, and he's a great role model.
Jerry Jones.
Loyal. Jerry is, there's a lot of stories, Jerry gets had gotten and kind of had that bad press about doing things not necessarily the way a lot of people would do it, but I tell you that I've never met an individual who is more loyal to individuals that played for him. He always, every time I see him, he asks, how the family's doing. He remembers, everybody's name. And I'll just share one quick story with you about Jerry Jones, that after I retired from the Cowboys, my son Chase was extremely ill, and we needed to go see a specialist in another part of the country, and he couldn't fly commercially. We couldn't drive. And I'd asked Jerry, Jerry, you're the only guy I know with a private plane. What do you think? He says, anytime you need it, it's yours. And he, for a couple times, we were able to utilize his jet to fly my son for medical attention, didn't ask for anything in return, and he'd give you the shirt off his back. And for me, I think the world of Jerry. I think he's a good man, and he has done a lot for me and for my family, and I have the utmost respect for him.
That's awesome. Your former defensive line mate, Charles Haley.
Charles?
Hall of Famer Charles Haley.
Well, no, I love Charles. Charles and I, early in my career, we butted heads literally a few times. And then after he retired, then as he's diagnosed with bipolar, and where he admits he gets help and is able to be medicated to the point where he does so much now that Charles and I are great friends. We do a lot of mentoring for inner city kids. I help Charles out in different charity things that he does, and he has a heart and a passion. He's really, truly utilizing his platform for the greater good. And it's one of those things that, he had the bad reputation early in his career, but he's finishing strong. And I'll just say, I love Charles Haley, and I think he's doing some phenomenal things, and he's given back to the community so much that whenever he calls out, I'm there. I'm there to help him with whatever.
Michael Irvin.
Michael's one of those guys too that one of the most competitive individuals I've ever been around. He would go above and beyond. Great teammate, very passionate individual. Michael had his issues that his demons, I guess, that he had to battle going through, but he loves the Lord. And again, he's given the testimonies at my Wingman ministry, and he loves his family, and he does a lot in the community. He's very passionate, and again, I have the utmost respect for Michael about who he is. A lot of people may want to throw stones at Michael for kind of some of the things that he did, but he who was without sin cast the first stone. And I encourage guys that it doesn't matter what you do through. It's always what matters is how you finish, and encouraging each other to finish strong.
Two more Cowboys, and then we'll finish up with one last question. My former colleague and coworker at ESPN, Darren Woodson.
Woody. Darren and I were rookies together, and one of the he still looks like he could play.
He does, doesn't he?
He's phenomenal athlete. Transition from a linebacker that he was at Arizona State to play in the secondary at safety. Record holder for the Cowboys for most tackles. I think future Hall of Famer. He's another guy that, for me, there's no better teammate in the locker room. Extremely, very intelligent, great communicator, family man, very focused, loves his kids. He's just an all-around. He's a good guy, and every time we get together, we laugh, we tease. But I did a thing for ESPN a couple years ago at the Air Force Academy during Veterans Day, and one of the guys, the commentators had asked about a story. I guess Darren, I used to tease Darren about, was that he made an interception running back for a pick six, and I was the lead blocker, and I kept up with him as a 295-pound D lineman running toe-to-toe with a 220-pound safety. And so I teased him that, hey, the big white guy was just as fast as you were. So that was kind of funny.
But he scored the touchdown, right?
Yeah, he scored the touchdown.
There you go. That's all that matters. Lastly, and the quarterback, everybody loves him, Troy Aikman.
Great teammate, great leader. Not necessarily a big vocal leader, but led by actions, and had high expectations for himself and for his teammates. One of the chapters that I alluded to in Force of Character wrote about him. He's not necessarily going to have all the records, but as who he was as a leader and his physical capabilities, I don't think we would have been able to win the Super Bowls that he did without his leadership and the example that he set, and how he was able to maintain. Just think about that. The personalities you have, leading rusher in the NFL, the triplets. Michael Irvin, who's a very passionate, very vocal, wants the ball all the time. The crew of the defense or the offensive linemen up front, a bunch of characters, individuals in their own right, personalities, but to be able to pull all that together and to focus and to then reach across the line too with the defense and encourage the guys on the other side of the ball, a great holistic leader and a good man, and what a phenomenal job he's done post-career too, and everything that he represents as an individual.
I would love to have seen him play in the era of today, in the way they throw the ball now, because obviously you guys were a run-first team back then in the 90s. I just think his talent wasn't on full display because you guys ran the ball so much.
Exactly. Well, you try to establish the run, pound them, and then pass when necessary. But he, the one thing about Troy though, he was stiff as a board. That's a guy that couldn't bend down to get his hands below his knees. And I thought, man, for a guy that is as athletic as you are, you can't touch your toes. That was the only fallacy that he had. Stiff. He needs to do yoga like me more now.
There you go. Now, Chad, thanks so much again for being a part of the podcast. We always end our podcast here with a simple question for each of our guests. So I'm going to ask it to you. What is God teaching you right now?
God is teaching me reliance upon him, wisdom, discernment. That's my prayer every day. And, go through life that, to rely upon him, to reveal himself more to me today, not to rely upon my strength, but upon his. And not that I'm anywhere near where I need to be, but that journey, it's an awesome place where you have to rely on him and faith in him alone to get from one day to the next. And I guess I'm right where I need to be. I'm right in that sweet spot.
He is Chad Hennings, 3-time Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys, member of the U.S. Air Force Academy, All-American Outland Trophy winner, author, speaker, you name it. His latest book, Forces of Character, wingmen.org and Wingman Ministries, doing some incredible work there. Chad, first of all, thank you so much for your service to our country, and truly I do appreciate and thank you for being a part of the Sports Spectrum podcast.
Jason, my pleasure. Take care.
And we do thank 3-time Super Bowl champion Chad Hennings from the Dallas Cowboys for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Really great insight on his career, his journey, going from the Air Force to the NFL at 26 years old, being a rookie, winning 3 Super Bowls, and then really having a wonderful vision for his life after retirement and wanting to impact men with his awesome Wingmen ministry that he's began. So really great having Chad on the show. And we welcome in, as always, Raymond St. Martin. He is the Director of Digital and Media for Sports Spectrum and Pro Athletes Outreach and the Increase. Raymond, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
Doing well, Jason.
What'd you think of Chad Hennings?
Oh, dude, I don't care what it is. If I'm lost in the woods or I'm shopping at Target, I want him on my team.
Absolutely.
Like, he's one of those guys that you feel like if that guy's on your team, not only are you going to win, but you're going to get through adversity. I mean, the guy was a fighter pilot, dropping bombs, protecting the Kurds. And then he's on the field, like tackling quarterbacks and winning 3 championships with the Dallas Cowboys. And I mean, and unlike you, Jason, like I was not a Cowboy fan.
Right.
But when you looked at him on the field as an outsider, you saw a solid dude. Like the guy that hit his assignment, knocked your head off, was always in the right place at the right time, and was leading that defense. So it was amazing to hear some of that backstory. Like I never knew about the Air Force. I never knew that he was from right here in Colorado Springs. He's talking about, the Front Range. And I'm like, hey, I'm stuck at the Front Range right now. That's so cool. Yeah. So yeah, Chad is by far one of the people that no matter what it is in life, I want that guy on my team.
Absolutely. And I loved how he was so focused on explaining through his time of going to the Air Force why he went there, and just the idea of wanting to mold himself into a man focused on, you mentioned it to me earlier before we were taping, focused on the task at hand and not focused on the what ifs. Wasn't that was pretty powerful, right?
That was my biggest takeaway when I heard this. It's like, the guy sacrificed a lot. He did a lot for his country. He's done a lot in the sport. He's doing a lot for men now. But I always look for these, what are the signs that they're exhibiting in their life? What are the characteristics that they are representing in their life that I could take something away from this? Like we've talked about this before, like doing prayer walks. Like what is that thing that I can take away from this? And I think being laser focused on the task at hand, when you're running big projects, you're running multiple teams, you're running, as you know, Jason, like we do a lot of things with a few people here. Yes. Like how do you stay the course and execute with precision and maintain character? And eliminating the what ifs from your life, the what ifs from your actions, the what ifs from your process, I think is something that anybody could learn from this, whether you're pumping gas at Exxon or you're the CEO of Exxon. You can't let the what ifs get in the way.
Completely. And I think that actually is a lesson for life and a lesson for, as we go into the workforce. You described what it's like to run around on Sports Spectrum every day. And it's just juggling a lot of balls in the air. But I think it's really a crucial lesson for us in our spiritual life, because for me, when I'm getting into the Word in the morning in devotions and I'm on that prayer walk that you just described, I can easily just hold my phone in my hand and suddenly what ifs creep in, distractions creep in, and the focus on the task at hand is gone. And I think we all struggle with that in many aspects of our life, both work, but especially spiritually. The spiritual side of focusing on the task at hand is so essential, I think, in our relationship with Jesus Christ.
It absolutely is. I mean, like, I think we need to define, like, what is a what if? You know, like, what is a what if? Like we were talking about earlier, you know, you put your cell phone away, you don't have your laptop open in that precious time in the morning. I mean, a what if could be, what if that's my wife calling? What if it's the doctor? What if it's that report I've been waiting for? What if it's this? Or you're working on a project. What if they don't get it done in time? Or what if it doesn't succeed? Or what if this person doesn't like it? Like, those are all things that we have zero control over when we're in the process of doing. And I think the next layer of that is, if we're questioning those that we have working for us and working with us, then we're not respecting and honoring them. Mm-hmm. And if we're asking what if about Jesus, if we're asking what if in our spiritual life, well, what if Jesus isn't real? Well, what if somebody else wrote this? What if this is just the extension of Greek mythology? What's happening to your soul? What's happening to your mind? The devil's creeping into that what if. It's like, once Jesus becomes real to us in our lives, there's no more what if. Like, there is no what if, bro. Like, yeah, there's no like, hey, what if? I'm like, because he is alive.
It's fear and doubt. And you said it before, and I'm actually preaching about this at my church in a couple of weeks on fear. Fear and doubt is not of the Lord. And when that starts to creep in, you're basically choosing that over your faith and trust in God. Like, that is a real essential thing to grasp here. And that's why focusing on the task at hand is so important, because that fear and that doubt and that what if, when it creeps in, it can do a lot of damage.
Especially in our lives, when we're following our calling and we're using our gifts in His service, we're done with the what ifs. There is no more what if.
Yeah.
There's only there's a heart of service. And I think that goes for anybody in any kind of service, following any part of your calling in life. Like, you have to be done with the what if, like, done with it. Like, if you feel a calling to go feed the homeless, well, what if somebody follows me home and gets my address and robs my house? Where did that come from? Like, this is a person in need that you are called to serve. Go serve. Leave the what if to Jesus. Like, leave the what if to the Father. Like, He's going to take care of the what if. But you're never going to get the rewards unless you follow the calling and you eliminate the what ifs.
That's so good. Raymond, thank you so much, and I appreciate that insight. And we appreciate you listening to the Sports Spectrum podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast.